The morning sun of what was supposed to be her wedding day rose over Sugar Hill, Georgia, with a kind of cruel, picture-perfect beauty. It painted the manicured lawns in shades of gold and dew-kissed emerald, promising a day of flawless celebration. But perfection was a lie. Alina Monroe knew this now, standing frozen in her silk robe, her bare feet cold on the stone patio. There, nestled amongst the pristine white petals of her mother's prize-winning peace roses, lay a single white leather dress glove. It was a stark, ugly slash against the morning's serenity, made grotesque by the dark, rust-colored stain that soaked the fingertips and palm. It wasn't just a stain, it was unmistakably blood, a scream built in her throat, hot and silent. This garden, this very spot, had been the heart of the celebration just hours ago. Now, it felt like a crime scene. She backed away slowly, her mind a screaming vortex of confusion and terror. The police were called, their arrival shattering the quiet, moneyed hush of the neighborhood with the surgical whine of sirens. Neighbors peeked from behind drawn curtains, their faces a mixture of curiosity and disdain. This kind of ugliness wasn't supposed to touch Sugar Hill. It was an intrusion, a stain on their collective illusion of safety. But the initial search yielded nothing. No body, no signs of a struggle beyond the discarded glove. It was a ghost of violence, a threat whispered into the dawn. Just 12 hours earlier, this same garden had been a fantasy brought to life. Laughter, as delicate as the clinking of champagne flutes, had drifted through the humid Georgia air. The pre-wedding party for Alina Monroe and Caleb Hayes was the event of the season, meticulously orchestrated by her mother, Serena Monroe. Serena wasn't just a mother, she was a force of nature, one of Atlanta's top real estate moguls, a woman who had built an empire in a world that wasn't designed for her. Her mansion, a gleaming white Southern colonial, stood as a monument to her success in a neighborhood where, a generation ago, her family wouldn't have been allowed to live. The party was a reflection of her, elegant, powerful, and flawlessly controlled. Alina, an accomplished architect, had felt like she was floating. In her blush-pink dress, she was the radiant center of this perfect universe. At her side was Caleb Hayes, her fiancé. He was impossibly handsome, with a smile that could disarm armies and a charm that had won over even the most skeptical of Serena's friends. He was a rising star in finance, the perfect match for the Monroe dynasty. Their love story felt like a modern fairy tale. Two successful black professionals who had found each other and were building a life of beautiful, aspirational perfection. "You're glowing, darling," one of Serena's friends had purred, squeezing Alina's arm. "Caleb is just a dream." Alina had smiled, her gaze finding Caleb across the lawn. He was talking to a group of his groomsmen, his laughter deep and easy. He caught her eye and winked, a private gesture in a public space that made her heart flutter. Everything felt right. Everything felt real. But even in paradise, there are shadows. And in the corner of that perfect garden, there was Silas Rhodes. He was Alina's oldest friend, a quiet, observant photographer who had known her since they were kids, scraping their knees on the playgrounds of a less affluent part of Atlanta. He moved through the party with a practiced invisibility, his camera a shield. He was always there, a constant comforting presence in the background of her life. While others saw the dazzling couple, Silas saw the details in the shadows. He saw the way Serena's hand lingered on Caleb's back a second too long when she guided him towards a guest. He saw the fleeting look of something in Caleb's eyes when he thought no one was watching. Pride? No, it was more like anxiety. The racism was subtle, as it always was in places like this. It was in the condescending compliments about how articulate Caleb was. The surprised looks when guests learned Alina had designed 3 major buildings downtown. It was a constant low-grade hum beneath the polished surface of civility, a reminder that they were still guests in a world that wasn't quite theirs, no matter how much money they had. Serena, ever the gracious host, raised her glass for a toast. Her voice, smooth as aged bourbon, cut through the gentle murmur of the crowd. "To my daughter, Alina, and the wonderful man she has found in Caleb. They are a testament to what love, hard work, and ambition can build. May their life together be as beautiful as this evening." As glasses clinked and applause filled the air, Alina felt a surge of love for her mother, for Caleb, for this life they were building. She felt safe, protected. She didn't see Silas lower his camera, his expression unreadable. He had captured the perfect family portrait, but his lens had also caught the imperceptible cracks in the facade. Later, as the party began to wind down, the moment happened. Alina was inside, saying goodnight to her aunts, when she glanced out the French doors. She saw Caleb standing near the edge of the property, partially obscured by a large magnolia tree. He was on his phone, his posture rigid, his voice a low, tense whisper. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked agitated, cornered. He ran a hand through his hair, glancing around as if checking to see if he was being watched. The easygoing charmer from earlier was gone, replaced by a man burdened by a secret. The call ended, and he quickly composed himself, the mask of the perfect groom sliding back into place as he turned to walk back toward the house. The image seared itself into Alina's memory. It was the first dissonant note in a perfect symphony. Now, standing in that same garden with police officers combing through her mother's roses, the memory returned with terrifying clarity. The bloody glove, the secret call. It was the beginning of a nightmare, and she was the only one who didn't know the script. The bloody glove was explained away by the police as a probable prank, a twisted act of vandalism by local kids. Sugar Hill had its share of bored, wealthy teenagers. It was a plausible, comforting lie. And for a few days, Alina clung to it like a life raft. The wedding was postponed, not canceled, Serena had insisted, her voice firm and reassuring. But the perfect image had been shattered, and Alina couldn't stop seeing the cracks. The world that had once felt so solid and secure now seemed fragile, ready to break apart at the slightest touch. The unease started as a low hum in the back of her mind, and grew into a roaring fire of suspicion. It was fueled by small, discordant details. A few weeks before the party, she had been cleaning out Caleb's car, a sleek black Mercedes that was his pride and joy, when she found it. Tucked into the side pocket of the driver's door was a crumpled receipt from the Starlight Motel, a cheap, rundown establishment on the industrial side of town, known for its hourly rates and discreet clientele. It was a place Caleb had absolutely no reason to be. When she confronted him, holding the receipt like it was a venomous snake, his practiced charm went into overdrive. "Oh, that," he said with a dismissive laugh, taking it from her fingers. "An old buddy of mine from college, man. He's hit a real rough patch. I was helping him out, fronting him some cash to get a room for a few nights. Didn't want to worry you with it, babe. It's handled." He kissed her forehead, his voice smooth and convincing. He made her feel foolish for her suspicion, for her lack of trust. She wanted to believe him, desperately. She loved this man, the life they were building, the future that stretched out before them like a golden road. But the explanation felt thin, like a cheap veneer over something dark and ugly. Why not just give his friend the cash? Why go to the motel himself? The questions lingered unanswered, poisoning the air between them. Then there was her mother. Serena's affection for her future son-in-law had always been effusive, but lately it had crossed a line, becoming cloying and possessive. She showered him with gifts, a vintage Rolex, a membership to an exclusive golf club, a first-edition book by his favorite author. "Just a little something to welcome you to the family, darling," she would say, her smile bright and wide. But her gestures felt less like welcoming gifts and more like transactions, as if she were buying a piece of him. Alina saw it in their interactions, in the small, intimate moments that felt deeply wrong. She'd walk into the living room to find them sitting close on the sofa, heads bent together over wedding plans, their conversation stopping abruptly when she entered. Once she saw Serena reach out and straighten Caleb's tie, her fingers brushing against his chest, her touch lingering far too long to be maternal. Caleb hadn't pulled away. He had simply smiled at her, a strange, knowing look passing between them that excluded Alina completely. It made her stomach churn with a feeling she couldn't name, a toxic brew of jealousy and betrayal. Silas, ever the silent observer, saw it too. "You need to be careful, Alina," he'd warned her one afternoon as they sat in his minimalist studio, surrounded by the ghosts of other people's lives captured in black and white. "Caleb, he's not the person you think he is." "What is that supposed to mean, Si?" she'd snapped, her patience worn thin. "You've never liked him. You're just jealous." "It's not jealousy," he'd insisted, his gaze intense. It's A feeling. I see things. The way he looks at your mother's money, the way he changes when he thinks no one's looking, he's a performer, and you're his audience. But he never offered concrete proof, never gave her anything more than vague warnings and gut feelings. His words meant to protect her only pushed her further away, making him seem like the bitter, resentful friend who couldn't stand to see her happy. She resented him for planting seeds of doubt, and she hated herself for letting them grow. The polarizing forces were tearing her apart. On one side was the life she'd always dreamed of, the magnificent house in Sugar Hill, the handsome, successful husband, the powerful mother who had given her everything. It was a world of glittering surfaces, of champagne and success, a bold statement against a society that had always tried to hold them back. On the other side was this creeping, insidious dread, a feeling that it was all a lie, the cheap, sordid motel receipt versus the vintage Rolex, the public declarations of love versus the secret, intimate glances. Her reality was splitting in two. The final damning piece of the puzzle fell into place on a Tuesday afternoon. Alina was driving home from a client meeting, taking a detour to avoid traffic, when she found herself on a street she rarely visited. And then she saw it, parked 2 blocks away from the Starlight Motel, partially hidden behind a large, overgrown hedge, was her mother's car. A pearlescent white Cadillac Escalade, unmistakable and completely out of place in this rundown neighborhood. The air left her lungs in a rush. It couldn't be. A coincidence. It had to be a coincidence. Serena could be visiting someone, doing a real estate deal, any number of perfectly logical things. But Alina knew, in the deepest, most terrified part of her soul, she knew. The motel, her mother's car, Caleb's lie. The pieces clicked together with the sickening finality of a coffin lid shutting. The 2 separate threads of her anxiety were not separate at all. They were woven together, creating a tapestry of betrayal so monstrous she couldn't bear to look at it directly. She hit the gas, tires screeching as she fled the scene, but she couldn't escape the truth that was now chasing her. Doubt, once planted, grows like a weed, choking everything beautiful. In the days that followed, the Monroe mansion in Sugar Hill felt less like a home, and more like a beautifully decorated prison. The air was thick with unspoken words and suffocating secrets. Alina found herself watching them, her mother and her fiancé, like a detective in her own life, analyzing every glance, every touch, every polite, empty phrase. The perfect couple was a performance, and she was the only one in the audience who knew the actors were lying. The breaking point came on a humid Thursday evening. The tension had been building all day, a low, simmering pressure that finally boiled over during dinner. It was a small thing, a disagreement over the caterer for the rescheduled wedding, but it was never about the caterer. It was about the chasm that had opened up between them. "You don't trust my judgment, is that it?" Caleb asked, his voice edged with a frustration that felt all too real. "It's my wedding too, Caleb," Alina retorted, her own voice sharper than she intended. "I'm allowed to have an opinion." "Of course you are," Serena interjected smoothly, placing a perfectly manicured hand on Caleb's arm. "We're all just a little on edge. Why don't you let your mother handle this, darling? You have enough on your plate." Her words were meant to be soothing, but they felt like a dismissal, a subtle reinforcement of the alliance between them. Caleb pushed his chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the polished hardwood floor. "I need some air," he announced, his jaw tight. "I'm going to stop by Serena's office to pick up the revised vendor contracts. We can talk about this when I get back." But he wasn't looking at Alina when he said it. He was looking at her mother. It was a lie. Serena's primary office was downtown, but she kept a smaller, private office in a detached guest house on their property, just 100 yards from the main house. He wasn't going anywhere. This was a pretext, a clumsy excuse to be alone with her. As soon as the front door closed behind him, a cold, terrible certainty settled over Alina. She had to know. She had to see it for herself. The not knowing was a poison, and the only antidote, however painful, was the truth. She slipped out the back door, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The evening was thick and warm, the sound of cicadas a deafening chorus in the twilight. She moved silently along the stone path, using the sculpted shrubbery as cover. The lights were on in the guest house office, casting a warm, inviting glow through the large plantation-style windows. It looked like a scene from a magazine. The rich mahogany desk, the leather-bound books, the tasteful art on the walls, an oasis of calm and order. Alina crept closer, her breath catching in her throat, until she could see inside. She hid behind a thick, fragrant camellia bush, its waxy leaves providing the perfect cover. And she watched. Caleb and Serena were not discussing contracts. They weren't even at the desk. They stood in the center of the room, their bodies angled towards each other. Serena was talking, her expression soft, vulnerable, in a way Alina had never seen before. Caleb listened intently, his head tilted. Then, he reached out and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from Serena's face. It was a gesture of such profound intimacy that it stole the air from Alina's lungs. Serena's hand came up to rest on his chest, right over his heart. She said something, her voice too low to hear, and a look of anguish crossed her face. Caleb's arms went around her, pulling her into a tight embrace. For a moment, it could have been a mother comforting her future son-in-law, a moment of shared stress over the wedding. But then Serena tilted her head back, her eyes fluttering shut, and Caleb lowered his face to hers. Their lips met in a kiss that was anything but maternal. It was slow, deep, and desperate, a kiss that spoke of secrets and stolen moments, of a long simmering betrayal that had finally burst into flame. The world tilted on its axis. The sounds of the night faded into a dull roar in Alina's ears. Her mother, her fiancé, the two people she loved and trusted most in the world were destroying her, right before her eyes, in the warm, golden light of that beautiful, treacherous room. She felt a physical pain in her chest, so sharp and violent it was as if a shard of glass had been driven into her heart. But she was not the only one watching. Across the manicured lawn, hidden in the deeper shadows of a massive oak tree, Silas Rhodes stood motionless. He had followed Caleb from the main house, his photographer's instinct screaming that something was wrong. He'd seen the look that passed between Caleb and Serena at dinner, and a primal, protective instinct had taken over. He lifted his camera, the long lens bringing the scene in the guest house into sharp, devastating focus. He saw the embrace. He saw the kiss. His finger hovered over the shutter button, his professional impulse warring with his personal horror. He could destroy them with a single click, expose their rotten secret to the world. But he didn't press the button. He slowly lowered the camera, the heavy weight of it suddenly unbearable. The viewfinder had shown him the truth, but what he felt was not the satisfaction of a vindicated theory. It was a profound, soul-crushing agony for Alina. And beneath the agony, something else was stirring, something cold and hard and dangerous. The pain in his eyes slowly receded, replaced by a chillingly clear resolve. The betrayal was not just against Alina. It was against him, against the sacred duty he felt to protect her. In that moment, watching the two people who were supposed to love her most tear her world apart, the quiet, observant friend died. And something else, something much more terrifying, was born in the shadows of Sugar Hill. The morning after the kiss was unnervingly quiet. The oppressive Georgia humidity had broken overnight, leaving the air crisp and clear. It felt like the world was holding its breath. Alina had spent the night in a fugue state, locked in her bedroom. The image of her mother and Caleb burned onto the inside of her eyelids. She hadn't confronted them. She couldn't. The betrayal was too immense, too monstrous to be contained by words. She didn't know what to do, where to go. Her life, as she knew it, had ended. The first call came from a frantic Serena around 9 a.m. "Alina, have you heard from Caleb? He never came home last night. His phone is going straight to voicemail." Her voice was laced with a panic that sounded sickeningly genuine. Alina's response was a numb, monosyllabic "no" before she hung up. The second call, an hour later, was from the Gwinnett County Police Department, and that's when the silence of the morning was shattered forever. Caleb Hayes was dead. His black Mercedes had been discovered by a jogger on a quiet tree-lined service road bordering a dense patch of woodland just a few miles from the Monroe estate. The scene was eerily calm. There were no skid marks, no signs of a struggle on the road. The car was just parked. But inside, the scene was one of brutal, explosive violence. Caleb was slumped in the driver's seat. He had been beaten to death with a heavy, blunt object. The interior of the luxury car was a Jackson Pollock of blood and shattered glass. It was a deeply personal, rage-fueled attack. The case landed on the desk of Detective Isaac Cross. He was a veteran homicide detective, a tall, imposing black man with eyes that had seen the worst of humanity, and a demeanor that was preternaturally calm. He'd earned his stripes in the trenches of Atlanta's most violent neighborhoods, and he understood the city's complex dynamics of race, class, and power better than anyone. A murder in Sugar Hill was different. It was high profile. The pressure would be immense, the scrutiny intense. Detective Cross arrived at the scene and immediately felt the shift in atmosphere. The local officers were tense. The neighbors who gathered at a respectful distance were a mix of white and affluent. Their whispers were audible. "This kind of thing doesn't happen here. He wasn't from the neighborhood, you know." The subtext was clear. The victim, a black man, had brought this violence with him from somewhere else. It was an infection from the outside world, and they were the innocent victims of its spread. Cross ignored them, his focus entirely on the scene. He noted the precise, almost deliberate placement of the car. It wasn't hidden, but it wasn't obvious either. The killer had wanted it to be found, but not right away. The brutality of the murder spoke of rage, but the quiet location spoke of a cold, calculated mind. It was a contradiction, and Cross knew that in contradictions, you find the truth. His investigation naturally began at the Monroe mansion, the last place Caleb was reportedly seen. The house, which had been the scene of a joyous party just days before, now felt like a mausoleum. Serena Monroe, dressed in a tasteful black dress, played the part of the grieving mother-in-law-to-be with chilling perfection. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her voice trembled, but there was a core of steel underneath her performance that Cross immediately detected. Alina was a wreck. She was pale and shaking, her eyes vacant with shock. She was trapped in an impossible position, grieving a man who had betrayed her, while simultaneously protecting the woman who had betrayed her with him. Her answers to Cross's questions were clipped and evasive. "Did Mr. Hayes seem upset when he left last night?" Cross asked, his voice gentle but firm. "We had a small argument about the wedding," Alina mumbled, staring at the floor. She couldn't bring herself to mention the real reason he had left. She couldn't confess to following him. She couldn't describe the kiss. To do so would be to condemn her own mother. Cross could feel the wall of secrets emanating from the two women. They were hiding something, something big. His instincts, honed over hundreds of cases, told him the key to Caleb's murder was locked inside this cold, perfect house. He and his team began a methodical search of the property. They combed through the main house, the gardens, and finally the guest house that Serena used as a private office. Everything was pristine, in its place, too pristine. Then they moved to the garage, a cavernous space that housed Serena's Escalade and a vintage Porsche. Against the far wall, propped in a custom leather holder, was a set of expensive top-of-the-line golf clubs. Cross wasn't a golfer, but he could appreciate the craftsmanship. He ran a gloved hand over the polished heads of the drivers and woods. Then he counted the irons. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, pitching wedge, sand wedge. He looked again. There was an empty slot in the bag, a conspicuous gap between the 2-iron and the 4-iron. The club head cover, emblazoned with a bold gold number 3, was still there, but the club itself was gone. "Get the forensics team to dust this entire set," Cross said quietly to a uniformed officer beside him. "And check the records. Find out when Mrs. Monroe last played golf." It was a long shot, but homicide investigation was a game of long shots. The murder weapon was a blunt object, used with ferocious force. The long, slender shaft and heavy, angled head of a 3-iron would fit the profile of the wounds perfectly. Suddenly, the elegant, powerful matriarch of Sugar Hill didn't just look like she was hiding a secret, she looked like a prime suspect. With the discovery of the missing golf club, the full, blinding spotlight of a homicide investigation turned on Serena Monroe. She was no longer just the grieving matriarch. She was the primary suspect in the brutal murder of her daughter's fiancé. To the outside world, it was a shocking, unbelievable twist. To Detective Isaac Cross, it was the first logical step in peeling back the layers of deception that surrounded the Monroe family. Serena was brought in for formal questioning. In the cold, sterile environment of the interrogation room, stripped of the power and prestige of her Sugar Hill mansion, she should have seemed diminished. Instead, she radiated an icy, unassailable composure. She was a woman accustomed to control, and she was not about to relinquish it now. Dressed in a flawlessly tailored navy blue suit, she looked more like she was about to close a multi-million-dollar deal than face a murder inquiry. "Mrs. Monroe, we have reason to believe you were the last person to see Caleb Hayes alive," Detective Cross began, his voice calm and even. He slid a photo of the golf bag with its empty slot across the metal table. "Can you tell me what happened to your 3-iron?" Serena glanced at the photo, her expression unreadable. "I have no idea, Detective. I haven't played in months. It could have been misplaced. Perhaps the groundskeeper moved it." Her voice was smooth, polished, each word carefully chosen. She was building a wall brick by brick, but Cross had already dismantled it. "Our preliminary phone records show over 200 calls and text messages between you and Mr. Hayes in the last month alone, many of them late at night. That's a lot of communication, just to be welcoming him to the family." For the first time, a flicker of something, anger, fear, crossed Serena's face before being quickly suppressed. Caleb was under a great deal of stress. The wedding, his job. He looked to me for guidance, as a mother figure. It was a masterful performance. She painted a portrait of herself as a compassionate mentor, a pillar of support for a troubled young man. She spoke of his anxieties about marrying into such a prominent family, his fears of not measuring up. She twisted the narrative of their secret intimacy into one of maternal concern. She was good. Cross had to give her that. She was one of the most convincing liars he had ever encountered, but her story was too neat, too perfect. It didn't account for the raw, violent rage that had ended Caleb's life. While Serena built her fortress of lies, Alina was trapped in her own prison of tortured silence. She knew the truth. She knew her mother was lying about the nature of her relationship with Caleb. Every time the police asked her a question, she was forced to choose between the truth that would incriminate her mother and the lies that would protect her. She chose the lies. "My mother adored Caleb," she told a detective in a separate interview, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. She saw him as the son she never had. They were very close. Her loyalty to her mother, a primal instinct forged over a lifetime, overrode everything else. Her grief, her anger, her own sense of betrayal. She provided vague, contradictory statements about the night of the murder, clouding the timeline, muddying the waters. She claimed Caleb had left in good spirits after their minor disagreement. She omitted her own act of following him, of witnessing the kiss. She became an unwilling accomplice to her mother's deception, and with every lie, she felt a piece of herself dying. She was actively obstructing the investigation into the murder of the man she had planned to marry, all to protect the woman who had shattered her world. The psychological torment was immense, leaving her hollowed out, a ghost haunting the opulent rooms of her home. The community of Sugar Hill, meanwhile, was forming its own narrative. The story of a powerful black matriarch potentially murdering her daughter's fiancé was a salacious, irresistible piece of gossip. But it was tinged with the familiar poison of racism. The story wasn't just about a love triangle. It was about the perceived volatility and moral failings they always suspected lurked beneath the polished surfaces of people like them. It confirmed their biases. They saw the Monroes not as a grieving family caught in a tragedy, but as a spectacle, a drama playing out for their entertainment and judgment. Detective Cross felt the pressure from all sides, from his superiors who wanted a quick arrest in a high-profile case, from the media who were circling like vultures, and from the community that was demanding a simple, clean answer. And right now, all signs pointed to Serena Monroe. The motive, a crime of passion. A lover's quarrel that had escalated into unthinkable violence. The potential weapon, her own missing golf club. Her lies and her daughter's obfuscation only strengthened the case against her. But Cross's gut told him it was too simple. The rage of the murder scene felt explosive and uncontrolled, yet the disposal of the body and the killer's clean escape felt methodical. Serena was a woman of immense control. If she were to kill someone, Cross suspected it would be a cleaner, colder affair. Poison in a glass of expensive wine, perhaps. Not a frenzied, bloody bludgeoning in a car. Something was off. The portrait of Serena as a jealous, rage-filled killer didn't quite fit the frame. He knew she was lying. He knew she was hiding a sordid secret. But his instincts screamed that she was not the murderer. The real killer, he suspected, was still out there, hidden in the shadows, watching them all chase the wrong suspect. As the investigation fixated on Serena Monroe, one figure remained consistently on the periphery, a ghost in the machine: Silas Rhodes. To the police, he was just another name on a long list of party guests, a childhood friend of the grieving bride-to-be. His alibi for the night of the murder was solid, almost too perfect. He had been at his studio, time-stamped security footage showing him entering at 10 p.m. and leaving at 6 a.m. He was a photographer on a tight deadline, a story that checked out with his clients. He was cooperative, soft-spoken, and expressed the appropriate amount of shock and sorrow. He was dismissed as a person of interest early on. In the chaotic days following the murder, Silas seamlessly slipped into the role he had played his entire life: Alina's protector. He was a constant calming presence at the Monroe mansion, a quiet pillar of strength in a world that had crumbled around her. He brought her food she didn't eat, sat with her in silence for hours, and listened patiently as she veered between numb grief and incoherent rage. He was the only one who didn't push her for answers, the only one who didn't seem to want anything from her. He was, in short, the perfect friend. Alina found herself clinging to him, this one stable point in her spinning universe. He was safe. He was familiar. He was the only person she felt she could still trust. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Si," she whispered to him one evening, her head resting on his shoulder as they sat on the patio, the now infamous rose garden shrouded in darkness. "You'll never have to," he had replied, his voice a low, soothing murmur. "I'm always here." But Detective Isaac Cross was a man who didn't believe in perfect anything. Not perfect alibis, not perfect crimes, and certainly not perfect friends. Something about Silas Rhodes nagged at him. It was his quiet intensity, the way his eyes followed Alina's every move with a devotion that seemed to border on fixation. Cross had seen that look before. It wasn't the look of a friend, it was the look of a worshiper, and sometimes the line between worship and obsession is terrifyingly thin. He decided to dig deeper, to look past the pristine alibi and the placid exterior. He assigned a young, tech-savvy detective to do a comprehensive background check and a deep dive into Silas's digital footprint. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Silas had a clean record, a modest but successful photography business, and a small circle of friends. But then the young detective found it, a sealed juvenile record. When Silas was 17, a girl he had been dating filed a restraining order against him. The complaint detailed a pattern of obsessive behavior, constant calls, showing up at her house unannounced, and taking pictures of her without her knowledge. The charges were eventually dropped when the girl's family moved away, but the pattern was there. It was a dark, ugly blot on an otherwise clean slate. The real breakthrough, however, came from the digital deep dive. Silas maintained a professional website showcasing his portfolio: elegant weddings, corporate headshots, and artistic landscapes. It was tasteful and professional, but the detective, using advanced search techniques, uncovered a second, hidden website linked to the same server. It was password protected, but the password was laughably simple: Alina Monroe, 1992. What they found inside was a stunning and deeply disturbing digital shrine. The site contained thousands of photographs of Alina, spanning more than a decade. It started with grainy photos from their high school days: Alina at a pep rally, Alina studying in the library, Alina laughing with friends. But it evolved into something far more sinister. There were countless photos of her in college, pictures taken from a distance, across the campus quad, or through a classroom window. Then came the photos of her in Atlanta, after she'd become a successful architect. Alina walking to her car after work, Alina having coffee with a friend, captured through the front window of a cafe. Alina sitting on her own balcony, reading a book, clearly taken with a powerful telephoto lens from a location she could never have suspected. She was the unwitting subject of a secret, decade-long documentary of her life. He had captured every mood, every haircut, every season. The sheer volume of the collection was staggering, the dedication horrifying. It wasn't the work of a friend cherishing memories. It was the meticulous, obsessive cataloging of a stalker. He hadn't just been in the background of her life. He had been watching from the shadows, always. Detective Cross stared at the screen, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. The photos were artfully composed, beautiful even. but their beauty was a mask for a terrifying obsession. He scrolled through image after image, each one a violation, a theft of a private moment. The man who was currently comforting a grieving Alina, acting as her loyal protector, had been secretly obsessing over her, documenting her life like a specimen under glass. The alibi still held. The security footage was irrefutable, but motive, the most powerful motive of all, had just exploded into view. Jealousy, possessiveness, a long, simmering obsession with a woman who was about to marry another man. Cross now saw Silas not as a grieving friend, but as a ticking time bomb. The question was no longer if he was involved, but how. How did a man with a perfect alibi commit a murder of such brutal, hands-on violence? The answer, Cross knew, was buried somewhere in the timeline of that dark, fatal night. The perfect friend was a perfect liar, and his meticulously crafted digital altar was proof of a love so twisted it had become deadly. The investigation had hit a wall. Serena Monroe, despite the mounting circumstantial evidence and her obvious lies, was sticking to her story. Her high-powered attorney was making it nearly impossible for Detective Cross to apply any real pressure. Silas Rhodes, the obsessive stalker, had an alibi that was, for the moment, unbreakable. The case was growing cold, and the pressure from the department and the media was becoming unbearable. The missing 3-iron, believed to be the murder weapon, had not been found. Without it, and without a confession, the case was stalled. Cross was a methodical man, but he also knew when to trust his instincts. And his instincts were telling him that the physical evidence they needed was still out there, somewhere in the dense, kudzu-choked woods that bordered the service road where Caleb's body was found. The initial search had been thorough, but had yielded nothing. The killer had been careful, but careful wasn't the same as perfect. He decided it was time to bring in the K9 unit. Specifically, he requested Shadow, a magnificent sable-coated German shepherd, with a reputation for being the best cadaver and evidence detection dog in the state. Shadow and his handler, Officer Miller, were a legendary team, known for making finds in cases that had long been considered hopeless. On a sweltering Georgia morning, the team assembled at the crime scene. The area had been cordoned off for weeks, but the oppressive stillness of the place remained. Detective Cross briefed Officer Miller, explaining his theory. The killer had attacked Caleb in the car, then fled on foot into the woods, likely discarding the weapon or other evidence along the way. He could have gone a mile in any direction, Miller said, surveying the dense, impenetrable-looking wall of trees. It's a needle in a haystack, Detective. That's why we have him, Cross replied, nodding toward Shadow, who was waiting patiently in the back of the patrol car, his intelligent eyes focused intently on his handler. Once released, Shadow was all business. Miller gave him the command, "Find it!" And the dog began to work, his nose to the ground, moving in a practiced, sweeping zigzag pattern. For hours they searched. The heat was suffocating, and the dense undergrowth tore at their clothes. They pushed through thorny bushes and waded through stagnant creeks. Shadow's unwavering focus the only thing driving them forward. They found nothing but discarded trash and animal bones. The hope that had buoyed them in the morning began to evaporate in the oppressive afternoon sun. They were about to call it a day when Shadow suddenly lifted his head. His ears perked. He let out a low whine and changed direction, pulling hard on the leash, dragging Miller toward a low-lying, swampy area thick with cypress trees and murky water. This part of the woods hadn't been searched as thoroughly, deemed too difficult to access. Shadow's excitement grew palpable. He began to bark, a series of sharp, urgent reports that echoed through the silent woods. He strained against the leash, plunging into the knee-deep, foul-smelling water, until he reached the base of a large, gnarled cypress tree. He began digging frantically at the mud and exposed roots, barking incessantly. "He's got something, Detective," Miller yelled, trying to keep his footing in the thick, sucking mud. Cross and 2 other officers sloshed through the water to join them. The smell of decay was overpowering. They used their hands and a small spade to clear away the mud and debris where Shadow was digging. At first, they saw nothing but a tangled mass of roots, but then a flash of white. An officer reached down and carefully pulled at the object. It was a piece of fabric, wedged deep into the hollow space beneath the tree's root ball. Slowly, they extracted it from the mud. It was a man's button-down dress shirt, balled up and covered in filth. But as they carefully unfurled it, they could see the dark, unmistakable stains soaked into the fabric. It was covered in what was clearly a massive amount of blood. But there was something else. Splattered across the chest and cuffs, mixed with the blood, were distinct patterns of mud and green algae. "Bag it! Handle with extreme care," Cross commanded, his voice tight with excitement. "Get this to the lab. Rush priority." Back at the precinct, the forensics team went to work. The blood was a match for Caleb Hayes, as expected. But the real discovery came from the other substances on the shirt. The mud contained specific pollen types unique to that swampy area of the woods. More importantly, the green algae was a rare freshwater species found in only a few places in the county, including the decorative koi pond in Silas Rhodes's meticulously maintained Japanese-style garden behind his studio. The alibi, the perfect time-stamped alibi that showed Silas at his studio all night. But his studio was miles away from the crime scene. How could algae from his private pond end up on a blood-soaked shirt found in the woods? It was the piece that didn't fit. The contradiction Cross had been looking for. The shirt was the key, the physical link between the victim and the obsessive photographer with the unbreakable alibi. Shadow hadn't just found a piece of evidence. He had unearthed the fatal flaw in the killer's perfect plan. The silent stalker had made a mistake, and the scent of that mistake had just led the police right to his door. The discovery of the blood-soaked shirt, tainted with algae from his own koi pond, gave Detective Cross the probable cause he needed. He secured a search warrant for Silas Rhodes's studio and apartment, and at dawn, the next morning, his team descended on the property. Silas, awakened by the loud, insistent banging on his door, appeared shocked and confused, playing the part of the wronged friend perfectly. But the performance was over. His studio was a masterpiece of minimalist order. Everything was in its place, cameras neatly arranged on shelves, prints stored in archival boxes, lighting equipment coiled and hung with geometric precision. It was the space of a man obsessed with control. Cross's team began a systematic search, looking for anything that could connect Silas to the murder. They searched for the missing golf club, for blood-stained clothes, for any sign of a crack in his carefully constructed world. For hours, they found nothing. The space was almost clinically clean. Cross was beginning to fear that the algae was a fluke, a dead end, when a young detective called him over to a large, antique drafting table in the corner. "Sir, I think you need to see this." The detective had noticed that one of the table's thick wooden legs seemed slightly askew. Upon closer inspection, he found a cleverly hidden false bottom. Prying it open, they found a small, concealed compartment. Inside was a single object, a black, leather-bound journal. It was Silas's diary. As Detective Cross began to read, a chilling portrait of a fractured, obsessive mind emerged. This wasn't just a diary, it was a manifesto, a meticulously documented account of Silas's all-consuming love for Alina and his escalating hatred for Caleb. The early entries were filled with a kind of painful, unrequited devotion. He described Alina in almost poetic terms, calling her his unreachable star, his source of light. He detailed moments from their childhood, imbuing them with a significance only he felt. He wrote about his secret photo collection, not as a violation, but as an act of preservation, of protecting her memory from the passage of time. But as Alina's relationship with Caleb became more serious, the tone of the journal began to shift, darkening into something venomous and paranoid. Caleb was never referred to by name. He was only the usurper, the stain, the gilded fraud. Silas chronicled Caleb's every perceived flaw with painstaking detail. He wrote about Caleb's expensive tastes, his slick charm, his ambition, all twisted through the lens of Silas's jealousy into evidence of a deep moral corruption. "He doesn't see her," one entry read. "He sees a prize, an accessory to his own pathetic climb. He is a parasite, feeding on the light that she so effortlessly creates. He is tainting her, and she is too pure to see it." The journal entries in the weeks leading up to the murder became increasingly unhinged. Silas described following Caleb, documenting his movements, searching for proof of his unworthiness. He wrote about seeing Caleb meeting with a shady-looking man in a parking garage, exchanging a briefcase for a thick envelope of cash, a secret life Caleb had hidden from everyone. He detailed his discovery of the affair between Caleb and Serena, writing about the kiss he witnessed, not with sadness for Alina, but with a kind of triumphant rage. It was the final proof he needed. "The snake has revealed its nature," he wrote. "He defiles not only the daughter, but the mother. He is a sickness in their house, and a sickness must be purged. It is my duty, my burden, my sole purpose. I will cleanse her life of his filth. I will be the surgeon who removes the cancer." The final entry, dated the afternoon of the murder, was the most terrifying of all. It was a cold, methodical plan. He detailed how he had stolen Serena's 3 iron weeks earlier during a visit to the house. He described his intention to confront Caleb, to force a confession of his betrayals. And if he didn't confess, then the cleansing will begin, the entry concluded. He had known, even then, that it would end in violence. It was a confession in all but name. They had him. The journal was the roadmap to the murder, the key that unlocked the dark chambers of his mind. But as Cross flipped to the very last page, he found something that made his blood run cold. It was a short, cryptic sentence, circled several times. "When it is done, I will take her to our place, and she will finally see. She will understand that this was all for her. We will begin again, in the place where it all began." There was no explanation of where our place was. It was a secret location, a piece of their shared history that only the two of them would know. Cross realized with a jolt of alarm that Silas, even now, was living in a delusional world where he was the hero of this story. He believed that Alina would eventually thank him for murdering her fiancé, and that secret place. It wasn't just a memory. It felt like a destination, a final dangerous endgame. The journal was the smoking gun, a direct line into the dark heart of the killer. They had motive, they had a plan, they had the physical evidence from the shirt, but the unbreakable alibi still loomed. The district attorney was confident but cautious. A good defense attorney could argue that the journal was pure fantasy, the ravings of a troubled mind, not a confession. They could create enough reasonable doubt around the algae evidence to guarantee a conviction, to close the door on any possibility of Silas Rhodes walking free. Detective Cross knew he needed one more thing: Silas's own voice, confessing to the crime. That's when he conceived of a plan so risky, so psychologically fraught, that it made his own seasoned detectives nervous. The key to unlocking Silas was his obsession. Alina. He needed to use her as bait. He called her down to the station. Alina arrived looking fragile, a pale shadow of the vibrant woman she once was. Cross led her into a private office, away from the chaos of the homicide bullpen. He didn't soften the blow. He laid it all out for her. Silas's secret life as her stalker, the hidden website with its thousands of photos, the restraining order from his past. He watched as her face cycled through disbelief, confusion, and finally, dawning horror. The man who had been her rock, her only source of comfort, was a monster. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "Not Cy. He wouldn't. He couldn't." Then, Cross slid the journal across the table. He had marked several pages. He gave her time to read Silas's twisted words of devotion, his venomous hatred for Caleb, his cold-blooded plan for a cleansing. She read about herself as his unreachable star, and she saw the love she had mistaken for friendship for what it truly was, a dangerous, suffocating obsession. When she finally looked up, her eyes were filled with a terrible, broken understanding. The last piece of her old life, the last person she trusted, had been a lie. "We have enough to charge him," Cross said, his voice gentle but firm. "But his alibi is strong. His lawyer will tear our case apart. I need a confession, Alina, and I think you're the only person who can get it." He then explained his plan. The journal mentioned a secret place, our place. He needed her to tell him where that was. Then he wanted her to call Silas, to ask him to meet her there. She would be wearing a wire. The goal was to make him feel safe, to make him believe his twisted fantasy was coming true, that she finally understood he had saved her and was ready to be with him. She would have to play the part of a woman in love with her fiancé's killer. Alina recoiled as if she'd been struck. "You want me to lie to him? To pretend I love him? After what he did? No. Absolutely not. I can't." The thought was repulsive, a violation that felt almost as profound as the murder itself. To manipulate a person's deepest feelings, even a monster's, felt like a descent into his own darkness. "I know what I'm asking," Cross said, his gaze steady. "It's a terrible thing, but this man murdered Caleb in cold blood because he couldn't have you. He is living in a fantasy, and in that fantasy, he is your hero. He is waiting for you to recognize his sacrifice. If you can give him that, just for a moment, he will give us everything we need to put him away forever. It's the only way to get true justice for Caleb." He let the words hang in the air. Justice for Caleb. The man she had loved, despite his betrayal. The man who had been brutally murdered, whose life had been stolen. Her own grief and anger, which had been directionless, now had a target. The thought of Silas getting away with it, of him watching from the shadows for the rest of his life, was unbearable. She sat in silence for a long time, her hands clenched into fists in her lap. She was being asked to walk into the lion's den, to confront the man who had destroyed her life and pretend he was her savior. It was the most terrifying thing she could imagine. But Detective Cross was right. It was the only way. A cold resolve settled over her, extinguishing her fear. She would do it. She would play her part in this final, horrific act. "Where is it?" Cross asked softly. "Our place." Alina's voice was a dead, hollow whisper when she answered. "It's called Chandler's Ridge. It's an overlook just north of the city. We used to go there in high school, to watch the sunset and dream about the future." Chandler's Ridge was exactly as Alina remembered it, a place frozen in the amber of her youth. It was a small, grassy bluff that offered a panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline, now beginning to glitter as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. It had once been a place of hope and innocent dreams. Tonight, it was a stage for the final act of a tragedy. Alina felt a suffocating sense of dread as she waited. The tiny recording device taped to her skin, a cold, constant reminder of the role she was about to play. A team of undercover officers, including Detective Cross, was hidden in the surrounding woods, out of sight, but close enough to intervene. She was as safe as they could make her, but the psychological danger felt immense. She saw his car pull up, and Silas got out. In the fading light, he looked just like the boy she had grown up with. He looked like her friend. He approached her with a hesitant smile, his eyes filled with an anxious, hopeful light. The monster was wearing a familiar, beloved face, and the dissonance was nauseating. "Alina," he said, his voice soft. "I was so worried when you called. Are you okay?" This was it. She took a deep breath, pushing down her revulsion, and summoned every ounce of acting ability she possessed. She turned to him, forcing her lips into a trembling smile. "I am now, Sai, now that I'm here with you. I've been doing so much thinking." She let her voice break, letting a tear she didn't have to fake trail down her cheek. "All this time, I was so blind. I thought I knew what I wanted, but I was wrong. Caleb, he wasn't right for me. You tried to tell me. I should have listened." Silas's face lit up with an expression of such pure, radiant joy that it almost broke her. He took a step closer, his hands reaching for hers. "I just wanted to protect you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "That's all I've ever wanted." Alina squeezed his hands, her own skin crawling at the touch. "I know that now," she said, looking directly into his eyes. "You protected me. That night, you did it for me, didn't you? You saved me from him." The dam broke. The words poured out of him in a torrent, a confession fueled by years of repressed obsession and a desperate need for validation. He was no longer just confessing, he was boasting, painting himself as a noble knight who had slain a dragon for his queen. "He was poison, Alina," Silas said, his eyes burning with a righteous fire. "I saw the kiss. I saw how he was using you, using your mother. He was a cancer. I followed him that night. He didn't even see me coming. I had the 3-iron. I took it from your mother's garage weeks ago. I knew I might need it someday. I confronted him on that service road. I told him to leave you, to disappear. But he laughed at me. He called me a pathetic little shadow who would always be in the dark." His voice grew harder, colder. "So I showed him. I showed him what a shadow can do when it's pushed into the light. I made him pay for what he did to you. I took the shirt I was wearing and I hid it in the swamp, where no one would ever find it. I went back to my studio. I had to be smart for us. It was all for us, Alina. So, we could finally have our beginning. He described the murder with a chilling detachment, as if recounting a scene from a movie where he was the hero. He spoke of the act not as a brutal killing, but as a necessary righteous act of purification. He truly believed he had done a noble thing. Alina listened, her heart turning to a block of ice. Every word he spoke was being captured, every detail of his horrific crime recorded for the world to hear. When he finally finished, he looked at her with pure, unadulterated love, expecting her to fall into his arms, to thank him, to finally return the love he had harbored for a lifetime. "Now, it's over," he whispered, pulling her closer. "Now, we can be together." That was the signal. From the trees, the shadows detached themselves and moved. Detective Cross and his team emerged, their weapons drawn, their voices sharp and commanding. "Gwinnett County PD, Silas Rhodes, you are under arrest for the murder of Caleb Hayes." The look on Silas's face was one of pure, shattering disbelief. He stared at the approaching officers, then back at Alina, his mind unable to process the betrayal. He saw the coldness in her eyes, the absence of the love he had been so sure was there. He saw the wire. He saw the trap. "Alina, no," he stammered, his fantasy world crumbling into dust around him. You were supposed to understand." He didn't resist as they cuffed him. He was a man in shock, his heroic narrative destroyed in an instant. As they led him away, his eyes never left Alina's face, his expression a mask of confusion and profound heartbreak. He still didn't understand how the hero could have become the villain. Alina stood alone on the ridge as they took him away, the flashing police lights strobing across her face, washing out the colors of the sunset. She had her justice. But she felt no triumph, no relief, only a vast, empty coldness. She had walked into the darkness to catch a monster, and she was terrified a part of her would never find its way back out. The arrest of Silas Rhodes sent shockwaves through Sugar Hill, a community already reeling from the murder. The story of the quiet photographer, the devoted friend who was secretly a murderous stalker, was far more shocking than the narrative of a simple love triangle gone wrong. The hidden website, the secret journal, the chilling confession at sunset, it all became public record during the trial, a horrifying tale of obsession that eclipsed the tawdry details of Caleb and Serena's affair. Silas's trial was short. Faced with the overwhelming evidence, the journal, the DNA on the shirt, and his own recorded confession, his high-priced legal team could do little. His defense attempted to paint him as a mentally disturbed individual, a man driven mad by unrequited love. But the prosecution, led by a sharp and relentless DA, portrayed him as what he was, a manipulative, narcissistic killer who had meticulously planned and executed a man in cold blood. Throughout the proceedings, Silas showed no remorse. He remained convinced of his own righteousness, viewing himself as a martyr who had been betrayed by the very person he sought to save. He was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice was served, but there were no winners. The fallout from the truth was catastrophic, leaving a trail of ruined lives in its wake. Serena Monroe was cleared of all suspicion in the murder, but she was convicted in the court of public opinion. Her affair with her daughter's fiancé became a public scandal. Her reputation, meticulously built over decades, was shattered overnight. Clients left her real estate firm in droves. Friends who had once clamored for an invitation to her parties now crossed the street to avoid her. She lost her business, her standing in the community, and worst of all, she lost her daughter. The chasm that had opened between her and Alina was too deep to bridge. The betrayal was absolute, a wound that would never heal. For Alina, the end of the trial was not a conclusion, but the beginning of a long, arduous process of rebuilding from the ashes. She had lost everyone she had ever loved or trusted: her fiancé, a murderer; her mother, a betrayer; her best friend, a monster. The very foundations of her life had been built on lies. She sold her share of the architecture firm and put the Monroe mansion in Sugar Hill up for sale. The house, once a symbol of success and security, was now a monument to tragedy and deceit. Every room held a ghost, every corner a painful memory. She needed to escape, to put as much distance as possible between herself and the ruins of her former life. She moved to a small, anonymous city on the West Coast, seeking the solace of the ocean. She rented a small cottage by the sea and spent her days walking on the beach, the rhythmic crash of the waves a soothing balm on her fractured soul. She was starting over, not as an architect, a fiancée, or a daughter, but simply as a woman trying to learn how to breathe again. One evening, standing on the wet sand as the tide went out, she watched the sun bleed into the Pacific. The tragedy had taught her a devastating lesson, one that would be forever etched into her heart. It was a lesson about the nature of love. She had seen how love, in its purest form, could be twisted by ego, jealousy, and obsession, until it became a destructive force, a poison that annihilated everything it touched. Silas's love was not love. It was a cage built of ownership and control. Serena's actions, born of a selfish, fleeting passion, were the antithesis of a mother's love. The greatest danger, she realized, often doesn't come from a stranger in the dark. It comes from the people who are closest to us, the ones who stand in the light and swear to protect us. It comes from the shadows they cast, the secrets they keep, and the darkness they hide behind a familiar smile. Her road to healing would be long. The scars of betrayal would likely never fade completely. But as she watched a new set of stars begin to appear in the darkening sky, she felt the first faint flicker of something she hadn't felt in a very long time. A quiet, resilient hope. She had survived the fire, and from the ashes she would find the strength to rebuild, not the life she had lost, but a new one, forged in truth and founded, this time, entirely on her own.